Dr. Kathy Wolf. Kathy is a research social scientist at the College of the Environment of University of Washington. I know many of you have seen her up here before over the years, so we're really excited to have her back. She's a research associate with the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station on urban forestry studies. Dr. Wolf's research explores the human dimensions of urban ecosystems. She has also worked professionally as a landscape architect and as an environmental planner. Kathy's professional mission is to discover, understand, and communicate human behavior and benefits as people experience nature in cities and towns. Moreover, Kathy is interested in how scientific information can be integrated into local government policy and planning. She has served with national organizations that promote nature in cities, such as Transportation Research Board National Committee on Landscape Environment, there's a mouthful, the Sustainable Sites Initiative, and the TKF Foundation. You can view her research going to naturewithin.info and through the Green Cities Green Cities Good Health Project at greenhealth.washington.edu. But I will also promise you, if you want to find Kathy Wolf, just Google her name. She's that famous. Please help me welcome Kathy.
Hello, everyone. So we had already mentioned that after lunch thing. All right, so I've got to keep the energy up, right? It is such a great pleasure to be here. As I look across the room, I see, as I told someone earlier, not old friends, long-term friends, right? As well as what I hope will be some new friends. And I appreciate the effort to share not only my own research, but some of the work of people who are doing related social science, public health science, geography, and so on all around the world. And I'll just start with more a story, or a couple of stories, really. I collect quotes about trees, probably some of you do the same. And I just find that sometimes I get so involved in the day-to-day details of getting things done and projects and whatnot. Every once in a while I need to step back and think about the importance of trees in a much broader sense. And I just arrived a couple of hours ago, and I looked at the program for this event, the agenda. And you're learning about a lot of very practical, important things with regard to trees. Management, policy, how to do things in the field that promote the sustainability of the urban forest. But I will now offer a more conceptual, a more abstract view, the why. The why do we need trees and the urban forest in our communities? And a couple of experiences, very quickly, I'll share with you. Will and Brian, are you still here? They did a presentation, maybe not. Will and Brian are the founders of Ascending the Giants. It's a nonprofit based in Portland. And if you look on that image, they're little purple squiggles. And those little purple squiggles are actually people. So they occasionally set up these climbing systems where there's a guide and a guest. And I was at one of these events several years ago, and they asked me to be one of the guides. They had an ornithologist that backed out. And so they said, hey, social scientists, you want to come on board? So for 3 days, another ecologist and myself, we were in this cantilevered system in these two trees, up and down, up and down. I went up and down this tree, about 180 feet, 45 people in 3 days. It was quite an experience. Beautiful tree, old growth, Forest Park Reserve, and this tree had different personalities. There's the base, it's big, it's solid, it's firm. Then they're in the middle where all the branches are, and it's kind of a maze moving through it. And then at the very top, it moves slowly in the wind. first alarming and then very pleasant experience. And here we are. This is a crew of arborists based at the tree. Myself and the guest, we get into the harness. The other ecologist, a guy, was much heavier than I am, so I wore a 15-pound kettlebell right there in front of me for those 3 days. And up we go. This was it confirmed many of the research studies that I've read, some of them that I've been a participant in, about the meaning of trees, the meaning and the connection that people have to trees. Some of the things that people experienced as we were moving up and down. Remarkable. And for some, an emotional experience once in a lifetime. And they knew that when they signed up to do this field trip. And finally, we get up at the top where there are arborists waiting for us, and we're perched up there while that other team is down below switching out. And then we go up and down again for 3 days' time. Well, I developed this, anytime now I have an opportunity to get up in a tree, I'm all in. And just 2 weeks ago, I was at the North Carolina Urban Forestry Council Field Day meeting. And I met these guys who have just rebranded their business. This is their business logo. Healthy trees, happy people. They've stripped away everything that says anything about pruning or tree care. That's it, right there. Hats, t-shirts, they gave me all the merch, right, or the swag. It was a lot of fun talking with them about this major marketing decision. But at this field day, look at this lift, this spidery lift. Well, I saw that and I thought, up in the tree, I want to be there. So after the demo, so this is a 3-ton, comes in on a trailer. Look at those little tiny tracks. You can wiggle into tiny spaces, and then this lift. I forget the height, but boy, was that fun getting up in there, seeing the world in a different way. So those of you who are climbers, it's probably part of the appeal of your work and your profession, is you see the world in a different way. And how do we share that with people? How do we, those who must stay on land, how do we share those feelings and sensations and benefits? So the title that I was asked to talk about is this idea of how the city evolves. And the first phase that I'm talking about is the sanitary city, early in the history of industrial cities and places. I see a few of you are taking notes. I will have this PowerPoint up online probably by the end of the day, and I'll give you a link at the end if you'd like to download it and look at some of these things again, because I will be moving through this fairly quickly. When people started moving to cities and industrialization happened, and we were all crowded, people were very crowded in spaces, they were not very hygienic, right? Animals are dying, they're left on the street. People didn't understand the relationship between water quality, air quality, dead things, and human health and wellness. So the garbage in your building, what do you do with it? Chuck it out the window. Sewer system, what is that, right? These urban tenements had outhouses, and you can only imagine then how that interacted with the water system. Oh, by the way, if you ever want to see this in greater detail, there's a film series called Filthy Cities, Paris, London, and New York. Fascinating, because they have filmed images like this juxtaposed with today's places in these cities. And to see this evolution of the sanitary city is quite interesting. Because of that, because of a recognition of hygiene, the emergence of city engineering, and so on, we have this incredible gray infrastructure under the ground and above ground. And I know for you, many of you, that is part of the challenge of your doing your work, is to first understand where this infrastructure is, and then secondly, to find those places where you can plant trees and sustain them adequately, root space, and so on. This is a museum. I kind of like going to quirky museums when I travel about, and this is one in Baltimore, a public works museum. And from the building, it's a very small museum, some historic pictures, but out the backyard of this thing, there's a sidewalk, a simulated sidewalk, and you walk up there and you can see that, you peer down and you see what is the typical underground landscape. within most cities. And there we see the remarkable challenges of space and opportunity for planting trees, or absence of opportunity for planting trees. But these systems are very important. I hear people talking more about green infrastructure. Gray infrastructure will not go away. There are still many cities, places, nations aspiring to these sort of sanitary systems. And now with the hurricanes in the Caribbean, Texas, and so on, we will see this sort of rehabilitation for a while before these sanitary systems can be reinstalled. So there's always this just over the edge, this challenge of safety, security, and human health. But now we move to the sustainable city, and I think most of you are working in these sorts of environments where decision makers, policy makers, elected officials are attempting, they're saying at least, they're pursuing the sustainable city and perhaps even resilience. And what that means is to understand what is ecological function and bring that back into these systems, rather than excluding it, as was done for much of the last century. And that doesn't mean literally bringing in forest areas or literally bringing in riparian areas. It's understanding how does ecology work and somehow plugging it in or working it into built environments. Part of this involves a systems outlook. And I'm finding, to my great appreciation, more and more urban planners are starting to engage with green systems, green infrastructure, urban forestry in cities. And urban planners think in terms of systems, transportation, housing, even art and humanities or culture, schools, police, and so on. And what we offer in urban forestry and green infrastructure is a set of solutions that can address a number of these different systems. Also, we work in scale. Some of you probably have jurisdiction over an entire city of whatever size, or an entire community. Some of you work more at a neighborhood scale, maybe more of a participatory planning effort. Others of you work with clients at the site scale. And what I see in this sustainable city sort of metaphor is working up through the scales, from site to an entire city, understanding the entire city, working down to the site, and how are those goals expressed. So an example many of you are familiar with, urban tree canopy assessment. It's a common tool now for taking stock of what is the extent of trees, in part their age, species diversity, and so on. And there are also tools, not only iTree, it's but one, but there are a number of tools where one can do an assessment based on canopy, or based on an inventory, or based on a plot sample, and from that understand the structure. So what are the elements we get from these tools? First, we understand the structure. Then the function of the forest. There are algorithms within some of these models that help us understand what is the benefit for water quality or water management, or what is the benefit for air quality, and so on, energy, carbon. Some of the models then move to economic value, helps us to make the case, helps us to project what a community would save or how they would benefit economically from budgeting for urban forestry. And finally, all of this information feeds into much better management. You can't manage what you don't know or what you don't understand that you have. I know that iTree can take a good bit of time in some instances, or some procedures, other tools, some cost, some time. But the basic four of what you get from that activity is structure, function, value, and then management understanding. So this idea of the sustainable city, trees and stormwater. We're beginning to understand, here in the Pacific Northwest specifically, what is the relationship between having a forest canopy and stormwater management. And I'm seeing then that this is taken to another level. It's not only thinking about putting in plants and putting in trees, but it's thinking about a broader set of systems, a broader set of functions. So this is Thornton Creek, North Seattle, let's see, it's actually just a little ways from here at Northgate. And it was decided to daylight this creek, Thornton Creek, and in that way, or as well as doing that, to serve a fairly large neighborhood watershed in terms of stormwater management. And this is that place a couple of years later. What do we see here? We see, because of monitoring, we know that it's effective for stormwater management, but we also see a people place. You're probably wondering, she's a social scientist, when is she going to get to the people thing? That's what we see here, a place where people can stroll through this garden, can look into it after a hard day at work, get out on the patio, maybe crack a beer, have a glass of wine, look out into this green. There's retail nearby as well, so people are actively moving through this space. Another example, Tanner Springs down in Portland. Again, serving the Pearl District neighborhood, a holding area, a retention area for stormwater. And rather than the engineering history of these sorts of basins or spaces, which is, no, people don't come in. Here's a fence around it. You're not allowed in. We're now rethinking, what are other benefits? How could this be co-designed for a variety of purposes? So if we look here on that back wall, it is stepped. It's a place where people will come, they'll sit, maybe even grab take out lunch, sit there for a bit. People can move through this space with this sort of windy, if you will, path, geometric path, connecting to nearby walking areas, connecting to the bicycle system of Portland. And then around the edge of this space are benches, little pods, little social pods. Social cohesion, very important for neighborhoods. Studies are showing that there can be possibly reduced crime in places where nature involves and encourages people to spend time together. And then education as well, environmental education opportunities. So the sustainable city, people are looking at various systems within the sustainable city and how nature, how urban forestry, how green infrastructure can achieve a variety of outcomes. My particular focus of late has been public health. How do these sorts of systems potentially aid people, promote wellness, and perhaps prevent disease? And if we look at disease, or if we look at health as a comprehensive system, a full system of prevention, wellness, well-being, and so on, it gives us a little different outlook on how we create our neighborhoods and how we create our cities. The idea being more and more people in public health are talking about social determinants. Sorry. Now you're awake, right? More and more people in public health are talking about social determinants. The idea that health is not only about the individual decisions that you make, such as, should I drink bottled water? Should I eat organic food? Oh my gosh, how often should I go to the gym? Oh, I'm not going to the gym. I should go to the gym. No, I can't. Those sorts of decisions play out in your health, certainly. But we now are understanding, in part because of some of the work being done in urban forestry and seeing gaps in tree canopy, for instance, in Seattle, the city of Seattle, that there are larger systems or larger conditions, broader conditions within our communities that have an effect on health. There is an ever-growing set of research around this, coming from around the world, from English language journals, and I've been promoting this project. We've been working on it for a number of years, Green Cities, Good Health. If you have any interest in trying to dig in and find more research about green, nature, and health in urban settings, this is a place that you might find helpful. And it is a website of multiple pages. There's about a dozen topics there, ranging from health benefits to individuals. Encounter me, myself, walking out on the street or in a park and so on, ranging up to benefits, wellness benefits for entire communities. And then, as I said, the scale idea from the site to the community to an entire city. And we've collected the research that helps us to look at these different scales of benefit. What we see across this literature is an incredible opportunity for introducing green in our communities. Urban forestry, of course, parks and gardens, green stormwater infrastructure, all those little things that engineers are talking about now, bioswales, rain gardens, and so on, to me are micro-parks that offer opportunity for people to connect with nature, to contact nature. Just a couple of weeks ago here, or in Seattle, was a Living Cities conference, and a lot of people were talking about biophilic design. Biophilia. Anybody recognize the word? Biophilia? It is this idea, this theory that we have an innate connection to nature because of our evolutionary background. And we've been so dependent on nature that we now acknowledge it in an aesthetic and utility sort of way. So there are more and more landscape architects and architects that are attempting to infuse nature into buildings and into built settings more directly. So the Green Cities Good Health website is a summary of research, and now what's happened is people have reached out and said, we'd like to do a summary of the summary. Here's one example. Nature Conservancy, we worked together to put together this document outside our doors. It's available. It's intended more for local government decision makers and electeds. Available as a PDF online if you search for that title in Nature Conservancy. And what all of this represents then is over 40 years of research and just a very quickly accelerating pace of study and research about all of this sort of thing, nature and health. And so I'd like to share some of the highlights of this. I don't know how you have experienced some of this research. It's often conveyed as bullet points or simple statistics, maybe in a fact sheet or a poster or a newsletter. And yet what we're seeing, because we have scanned across thousands of articles, thank goodness for grad students and helping out with that, we've seen now ways of conveying this maybe in a little more memorable way. And one of these stories, if you will, is Cradle to Grave, that the research, not only your intuitions, that's the thing. I understand that many of you, having worked in the green industry, probably grown up with maybe as a feral child, right, outdoors, probably have these intuitions about the importance of nature contact. But the research, for some people, is fairly novel. It's kind of a curiosity. And this might be another way to talk about it, is when you're really young to when you're really old, all the way across that span, it's important to have nature in our everyday environments. Some examples. Again, you may have heard of some of this research in the past. Hopefully I've brought in some of the newer material. Jeff Donovan, down in Portland, has done some great work where he's done statistical correlations between health outcomes and the presence of trees. And here is one finding that households where pregnant women have tree cover within a certain proximity, across the population, the babies are at healthier birth weight. And now this has been seen in other studies as well, in Madrid, London, Vancouver, British Columbia. Very important. Healthy birth weight sets us up as individuals. If we're healthier at birth, we're better set up to learn in school. And we're now starting to see from this research correlations. If you're not as healthy when you're young, you're more inclined to be prone to disease when you're older, in middle age. So there's this progression. Getting kids off to a good start has consequences as people get older. This is really now gaining some momentum. When this idea came out maybe 10 years ago, people were like, huh? But probiotics, in a sense, we're talking about nature experiences probiotics. And the research is finding that the health of this area down here is very related to the health of this area up here. We used to think of them as quite separated, the medical community, philosophy, right? I think, therefore I am, that kind of stuff. We now know that if our stomachs that are probably working really well for you right now after lunch, right? The health of our GI system is connected to the health of the mind, and including reduced depression and so on. Well, within that, we're finding that children need health-inspired nature contact, to the point where there are now studies, there's just a few of these, but they're now starting to say if kids don't get enough contact with nature at a very young age, their immune systems are not being set up adequately. They need not necessarily to eat dirt, but to touch trees, touch the ground, be outdoors, again, because of that long-term consequence of building the immune foundation. So the next progression in all this that I'm seeing as I talk to people around the country is that there's enough understanding of this science or awareness of this science that people are starting to say, well, let's do something. What kind of programs can we do? And this is one that's getting traction in different cities, starting forest schools. These are preschools for little kids. And this one started at Washington Park Arboretum in Seattle. Very popular, really long waiting list. And now there's a nonprofit in Seattle that's actually starting more of these schools in some of the public parks. But these kids are outdoors almost all the time. Only in the worst weather are they indoors. Free play, learning, social engagement, curiosity, imagination, all of those things that wrap around being outdoors and helping kids get a good start. We've all heard about our sedentary lifestyles. I just read an article yesterday. This is not about nature. This is about sitting still. Sitting at a desk, sitting, TV, whatever. Mayo Clinic is saying that sitting is the new smoking in terms of health effects. And we were hearing, 2 hours, after 2 hours you gotta get up and move. Get up and move, get up and move, even a short amount of time. Yesterday I read an article that said 30 minutes. 30 minutes being seated and beyond that is not good for us. So I think that might change the character of conferences, right? You have a break every 30 minutes. But getting up and being active, there are better ways to do it, some ways better than others. Research all around the world, this is going on. Japan, for about a decade, now a little over a decade, people have been studying Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. Initially, the studies were simply being out in the forest and walking, a couple of hours, half a day, maybe the weekend. Now there are forest bathing stations being set up, and they have some level of health monitoring, blood pressure, stress response, cortisol, that kind of thing. I have heard, don't know for sure, but I've heard that in California, there is a forest bathing certification starting to take hold, getting some traction so that people can be forest bathing counselors. As I said, programs. First we have the research, people then respond and say, I want to do something like this, or I've had young people after presentations like this say, arborist, yeah, urban forester, what else? What else can I do? And so these sorts of health-oriented careers, who knows what people will be doing in 10 years' time. Walking, so important. Just a little bit, every once in a while, moderate activity, so important for health, that sort of thing. But also for mental health. Several studies are showing that walking helps reduce depression. And one colleague of mine who's just moved from Stanford to the University of Washington has specialized in this, nature experience and depression. And his idea, his theory is that we have in the background in our minds, we're always thinking, right? There's always this going on. And that inner voice can turn on us. So this idea is rumination. There are some people who tend to ruminate on the bad things in life or an unusual bad situation. And that tends to tip people into depression. So what my colleague is finding is that walking, not only walking, but walking in nature helps to break that rumination cycle, helps to pull people back from those negative thoughts and move them to maybe a space where they can think more positively and work through some of those issues that may be leading to depression. Another study done by Mark Berman, he's at the University of Chicago. He's doing some interesting things with neuroscience, actually doing brain scans as people are seeing nature images. Work's not yet published, coming along. But here, in this study, he had groups of people assigned, randomly assigned. Some walked through green neighborhoods, some walked through highly built neighborhoods, very few trees, very little nature in those surroundings. And what he saw then was improved mental function, improved ability to focus on a task, as well as better mood after walking in green. So as I said, there are a number of organizations, places, people that are trying to convert this research and take it to some sort of action in their community. And maybe you can be a part of that. So walking programs are becoming quite common. And they often have a focus on a particular group. So there might be family walking, there might be office walking, there might be well, anyway, you can think of different groups. Saturday walking, Sunday walking, after work walking, happy hour walking, right? A lot of different opportunities here. I have started on recommendation of some friends, I've started doing walking meetings. And I find that really kind of helps to spin off some different ideas, particularly with students. Come to the office, sit at the chair, we talk through, no. Let's get up and walk around campus a little bit and think through these ideas. It sets up a little different dynamic. Again, Jeff Donovan, and I haven't been explicit about this, but what I'm trying to show is that from early years of our lives to middle age, after we graduate from school, be it high school or college, we move to a neighborhood, maybe we're renting, maybe we own, and then of course we get older and different life situations. But here, this neighborhood is not unlike a lot of cities in the Midwest and the Northeast that had predominance of ash in their canopy, and emerald ash borer has moved through and decimated entire streetscapes like this. And the last image, a third image on the right, would be a street with no trees at all, because these trees die very rapidly, they become hazardous, and then at great cost, those plants are removed. Jeff Donovan was able to access health records across a number of counties that were impacted by emerald ash borer, compare them to canopy cover before and after across a fixed amount of time, and finding here, as you see, respiratory and cardiovascular health impacts. And again, so some of you as scientists are looking at that and saying, yeah, but what about socioeconomics? People in more affluent neighborhoods, more trees, more access to healthcare and whatnot. And Jeff and others who do these correlation sorts of studies take into account, as best they can, socioeconomics, and they often find that across different income grades, across different age groups of people, that these benefits hold. Get a little older, cognitive disorders are on the rise, not only because our population is aging, but within that population. There's a higher degree of these cognitive disorders. Dementia, Alzheimer's, we really, as far as I know, the public health community doesn't really know why. And so what we are finding now is in some studies, having nature, having green in these care facilities can be helpful. Reduce medication use, fewer falls. Falls are important when you're older because once you fall and maybe have an injury, say a broken bone, uh-oh, there's that thunder again. Sorry. Maybe I should stand at the podium. Just hold on to the edge if you like. But having green in these care facilities is really important. Very often not possible because of limited space. Very often not appreciated by staff because it adds another layer of paying attention to patients and the people they're caring for as they're outdoors. But again, studies are showing that this has a positive effect. So all of this, all right, so go back to the environmental services of iTree, right? Economics, right? Reduced great infrastructure to manage water, cost savings to a city. Reduced energy use, cost savings to a city. Imagine the cost savings to a city and a community and even an individual household if there was quality nature, an abundance of quality nature around our neighborhoods. And we could gain the economic benefits of all of these outcomes. And that's something that is highly important because right now we're spending about 17% of our gross domestic product in this nation on healthcare. So of course we're hearing, particularly this week now, once again, debate about affordable care, about access to insurance and whatnot. This is a really important issue because of the cost to our society. Medicaid, Medicare, and everyone's care generally. $3 trillion. It's a huge, it's far more than what we pay for great infrastructure. It's far more than what cities pay for energy, frankly. Healthcare is huge. So again, this is some of the more recent work that I've been doing, is to attempt to throw some numbers around. Figure out, what are those economic valuations? What are those economic consequences of having quality nature around us? And it's working with economists, what a different adventure that was from a scientific standpoint. But very informative. Worked with 3 different economists, a postdoc and then 2 faculty members at Mississippi State University. And what we did was to find these benefits across the literature that have economic value. And what might they be? Think for a moment. All this stuff that I told you about, having nature, what might you gain in terms of budget or value or cost savings? Any thoughts? Anyone?
Reduced policing costs.
What's that?
Reduced policing costs.
Reduced
Policing costs.
policing.
Reduced mental health services costs.
So reduced, gentleman here is talking about other studies that have shown reduced crime associated particularly with vacant lots and neglected lands that have been cleaned up, so we save on policing. Reduced depression, what do we save? Reduced costs of counseling, reduced costs of medications, reduced costs of time in facilities, perhaps. You may have heard about the studies about ADHD and children, right? Routine activity outdoors and finding that children are showing fewer symptoms of ADHD. What do we gain there? What is the standard or traditional treatment for children with ADHD? Medications. Give that kid some pills. And we have members in my family, not immediately, but extended family that are on Ritalin. And to talk with these kids about the long-term consequences of how they view and sense the world. We really really don't understand that very well. So with all of this, reduced medications can be a substantial savings, reduced professional care, reduced hospitalizations, and so on. And again, we sorted this all out by cradle to grave, life cycle, from the very earliest times of our life to the latest times of our life. And to cut to the chase here, here's one example. A study that was done in Toronto, Canada, finding that those neighborhoods having trees, just 10 additional trees on a neighborhood block as compared to other neighborhoods, and finding that it had a difference of health gain comparable to more affluent neighborhoods or comparable to being younger in age. So again, translating that to economic values, what we found was a cost of, or savings of about $12 billion a year on an annual basis. But the point I'd like to make is we only used, half a dozen of these benefits. And there are many, many more that have the potential to be valued. And again, to help us transmit, to help us convey, to help us share why having trees and nature and green infrastructure are so important in our communities. I'm going to move now to what I think is the next progression from sanitary to sustainable to sacred. Sacred, spiritual. I don't mean religious. I don't mean affiliation with any particular denomination or faith system, but a deeper meaning in our lives. How many of you ask a friend or a colleague, how you doing? You know, you greet them, hey, how's it going? How you doing? Constantly I hear back, I'm way too busy. Too much going on. I'm feeling stressed. I think that maybe this next step in this progression of cities is to restore a sense of meaning, to try to restore a sense of calm in our lives, to return or to embrace sacred in some way. Trees, to me, are a part of that. Connections with trees, particularly big trees, one gets a sense of the long-term, the durability, the length of life, the cycles of life. We're into autumn now, loss of leaves and spring growth and all of that. Maybe a sense of healing as well. One example, John Gathright is an arborist, professional arborist. He's from Canada, but he now lives in Japan. And he started out as a consulting arborist. Maybe he's still doing some of that. But he also does these recreational tree climbs for therapy. And John started working with a group. These kids have mild birth defects. Maybe an extra finger or toe. Maybe the absence of one finger or toe. They're fully functional. Maybe you can see on the bottom right there, the kids, their hands, slightly deformed, a little different. And so these kids are bullied, they're shunned, they're teased in school, especially if they're separate. So there's this organization that offers these kids a support group, and in this case, some climbing opportunities. And they learn about the harnesses, they learn about the technology of climbing, they learn about safety while they're up in the trees. And John, for his PhD work, has studied this and found that there are emotional, psychological benefits associated with tree climbing. Now, Japan probably has fewer lawyers per capita than here in the US, so I recognize that few of you can routinely take a bunch of people up into trees. But are there other ways to connect people? Are there programs? Again, with the research that we have, what we know, can we begin to develop programs that connect people more directly with these sorts of experiences? Some of you, I know, work with stewardship programs, bringing together volunteers, projects, but often those projects are very oriented to getting something in the ground or out of the ground, right? Blackberry out, ivy out, trees in, and so on. I don't know if there's a way to incorporate this sense of meaning, connection, sacredness, if you will, in those sorts of projects. And have a little fun while you're doing it. example, and I think this is really relevant all over the country right now. We have Joint Base Fort Lewis McChord in the region, other military facilities. The health impacts of people who have been in service, particularly those who have been on conflict in other parts of the world. We hear about PTSD, veterans of PTSD. My understanding is that most people who have gone to combat actually have some expression of the stress spectrum. We hear about the most extreme end of that spectrum, but there are many people who are coping with the experiences they've had of reintegrating with their communities and the stresses involved with that. Programs. Here are some that I hear about fairly often. Veterans going out into the wild. Reintegration after service. Connecting back again with who they are. Grounding, regrounding. Hiking, rock climbing, sailing, backpacking. But my feeling, my thought is, with what we know about nature and healing, eventually these folks will have to come home to family, loved ones, neighborhoods, work. And then what can nature offer them after these initial reconnections, more dramatic reconnections, if you will? So that takes me now to some of the consulting work that I've done with the TKF Foundation. They're a small family foundation based in Annapolis, Maryland. And they have been funding what they call open spaces, sacred places. And these are basically small gardens that are meant to be places where one can go for quiet reflection, contemplation, and so on. Well, about 5 years, they decided to do this program of integrated design and study, that they would continue to support the creation of 6 gardens around the nation. One is actually in Portland at the Legacy Hospitals. There are others scattered around the country. But they had no experience with research, so they scanned around and somehow they said, hey, Kathy Wolf, maybe she can help us out. So I've been their research advisor for several years. So let me share with you one of the projects. It is at Walter Reed National Medical Center. Over 1 million people served, mostly veterans and active duty, but includes the president, includes the cabinet, but it's a very large facility, and it includes a teaching hospital. There are physicians, service physicians that are learning their craft and knowledge here, and many of the more extreme patients in terms of physical disability as well as emotional disability come to this facility. And it's very important because they're now trying to figure out not only how do they serve people who come and are healed or enter a healing process on site, but after they go away, what might happen? Because we're seeing an incredible rate of suicide in people who have been in active duty. And they're finding that drugs alone, medications, not opioids, if you will, but medications and counseling, helpful but not doing a complete service to these folks. So here's the garden. It was an abandoned woodland ravine, and for years prior to, again, the sanitary city ideas, junk was thrown into this ravine by the hospital. So the first step was the safe removal of these materials and toxins. That cost far more than anyone had expected and delayed the project. But then they were left with a ravine, a stream moving through it, and a fairly well-developed deciduous forest. So it's a natural woodland. What they're hoping to provide to people is maximum encounter, minimum disruption, trying to screen all that's going on in this large medical facility adjacent to this ravine. And emphasizing not only the presence, but the symbolism of water, stone, trees, animals, a reintegration, a reconnection of these folks with nature. And then the research overlay. It's a pretty high-powered team, people representing different institutions, both within the government and academia to help out with this. And they're just starting data collection now. The garden was completed about 6 months ago. They had to fine-tune a few of the design factors or design elements, and now they're starting data collection. Here you see the ravine, the creek there, a path, a walking path, meander path, all designed to ADA requirements. Various pavilions, places. Some people are moving through this in wheelchairs, some are moving through with crutches, some are recovering mentally as well. So there have to be a lot of opportunities to stop and rest as one moves through the space. There's also a design advisor for the TKF Foundation. And so we visited the site, and the initial design was to move all the woody debris that had collected over the years. So trees that had fallen or trees that were sectioned, cut into pieces because who knows why, but there they were. And the designer said, you know, let's have a workshop with some of the patients in the hospital. Let's talk through some of this design idea. And the soldiers said, you know, leave those bits of wood. They remind us of some of our comrades. They remind us of some of our people that have fallen. And so for us, it's a symbol. For us, it's something to help us remember and work through the reason why we're in this hospital facility. So that sort of input helps shape this garden, helps shape the curves, the meander, the contact with water, as well as leaving behind these large lawns as places where people can sit, talk, reflect, and again, maybe these are elements of the sacred. The stream restoration, very important. Water, the soothing character of water. We see that time and time again in design and research response. And here are some of the pavilions. Small, intimate places. These are meant for small groups. There's no amphitheater here for performances, or there's no classroom, outdoor classroom sort of thing. These are small spaces for people to gather with loved ones, as well as others who are going through treatment, and your caregivers to talk and reflect. So there is a quick run through 40 years of research that's been going on, as well as some emerging ideas. And we have looked at the sanitary city. It's absolutely essential. Great infrastructure will continue. But our challenge, and what I think many of you are working on, is how to integrate trees and green and nature more effectively into those great infrastructure plans and purposes. And that's happening. In fact, it seems here in the Northwest we're doing some of the most innovative work even across the world. And people, I don't know how often I'll travel to other places and people will ask, well, what are you doing in Seattle? What are you doing in Portland? So carry on and continue doing the great work that you have up to this time. The sustainable city is sustainability. You talk to a different person, you get a different definition. But I think we kind of are sensing that it is a greater integration of ecology. It's an effort to understand how things can self-promote, or systems can self-promote over time with some guidance and care and stewardship from people. But maybe then we move next to the sacred. Within that high functionality outlook, sanitary to sustainability, how do we help people connect? Maybe it's ages and stages, but I'm starting to think about nature gives us all these benefits, be it environmental services, water, air, energy, and so on, and then all these health benefits. How do we start to talk about gratitude? How do we take this back to a planet that's really being kicked around a good bit and begin to reevaluate and re-understand our relationship to all of these systems? I mentioned that this presentation will be online. If you go to this website and look at what's new, that link, the PowerPoint PDF will be there. Again, by the end of the day, maybe tomorrow morning. Ian just told me I have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. So I'm going to just set this up with questions, comments, anything that you might have to add, or as I said, any questions you might have.
Any way
Please.
to make malls more tree friendly with respect to trees?
Malls.
Shopping centers, greening up those places that tend to be urban deserts.
Question is about greening up malls. There aren't many great examples, as we all know, moving place to place around the country. The biophilic design, the combination of biophilic design and green infrastructure, I'm seeing sort of micro examples. One is treating parking lots in sort of phases of drainage or phases of materials rather than uniform asphalt paving. So where there's high traffic, having more durable paving materials. But then as you go to those outer edges of that parking lot where you rarely see cars parked except maybe for Thanksgiving weekend, Black Friday and all of that, then there are more pervious pavings or different solutions for water interception. I'm seeing a little more green infrastructure, bioswales, rain gardens and whatnot, interspersed within these large parking lots. Shopping, the building itself, I'm seeing more introduction of green, biophilic design within the buildings. University Village in around the University of Washington. An outdoor mall that's popular all year round, and they continue to infuse more horticultural nature, not so much endemic or native nature, but more horticultural nature within those spaces. And I would guess that the revenue model, very few vacancies in the place, and I would imagine that the revenue rates are pretty good there. In part because it's a very welcoming and comfortable space to be in.